Hi everyone, and welcome back to our series on how to edit video in DaVinci Resolve. And before we actually get started editing a project, there are some settings that I think are important to take a look at and understand and set up optimally for your project, the project that you're working on. After you have been working with DaVinci for a while, all of your projects will show up here with beautiful thumbnails to help you identify the project that you want to open up. But I want to start out this series with my computer screen looking a lot like what yours would be if you have just installed the program and running it for the first time. So I'm going to make a new project library. And project libraries, kind of think of project library as a grouping of projects. You might have different types of projects that you're working on and you want to keep them all organized into different groups. Well, you can have as many project libraries, groupings of projects that you want. Let's add one today. Let's call it Learning Media Skills. And hit create. It's going to ask you what hard drive you want to put this in. I would recommend that you put your project libraries in a hard drive that is permanently attached to your computer. And these file sizes are very small, so it wouldn't hurt just to put them on your C drive, your system drive. And that's what I have open here. I've even made a folder for databases, and let's just save it to that. So now we have a whole new project library, and now my screen should look a lot like yours if you're just running the program for the first time. So the first thing that we need to do is actually start a project in order to change some of the settings. And DaVinci has several different ways that you can start a brand new project. You might notice the button down here, New Project. You could actually right-click in any of this area here and choose New Project. From the drop-down menu, you can click on this Untitled Project, double-click on that, and that'll start one. Of course, you've got menu settings at the top as well, so just go ahead and pick any one of those options. I'm going to double-click on this Untitled Project. So now we have opened up our first project. It's still untitled, as you'll notice up here, but we are inside a project. The first thing that we might do is go way up to the top left-hand corner and bring down the drop-down menu from DaVinci Resolve. And let's go into Preferences. There's a setting here that I believe is important that you change from the default settings. DaVinci does a pretty good job of having their default settings work well for almost any environment and any project, but there's a few that by default should be changed. Let's go up to the top here and select the User tab, and let's go down to Project Save and Load. And I believe by default DaVinci might have both of these unchecked. Not sure on that. It could be that by default the live save is checked. What that does, the live save, it's great. You can be working along, spent an hour working on a project, and for some reason DaVinci might crash on you. Yes, DaVinci does crash from time to time, and if you have the live save checked, you're not going to lose any work. As soon as you load that project back up again, you're going to be exactly where you left off because it's kind of saving every motion that you make. And so you're not going to lose any work if you have that live save checked. So make sure that's checked. And then also, I believe it's important to have project backups checked as well. And you can determine how often this backup is done. I have it set for 10 minutes. You might want to have it more like every 5 minutes you save a backup. Hourly, you can change the hours on that so that every day your projects are backed up. Also, how long your project is going to be saved before it automatically deletes it off your hard drive. I've got it set for a month. You can have that set for as many days as you want. And then you need to let DaVinci know where you want these projects to be backed up to, what hard drive. And again, these files are quite small. They're just basically text files. And so you could save them to your system drive without any problem. I have them set to save to a SSD drive that I have permanently attached to my computer. But you can decide yourself where you want these backed up. I think the most important thing here is to save it to a hard drive that is fast, because if you're saving to a slow drive, this process of backing up every 10 minutes could take longer than what you would like. It can disrupt the flow of your edit. But if you've got it to an SSD drive, it's going to be fast. It'll only probably take a second or two to back it up. All right, and once you have it the way you like, hit save. The next thing I want to take a look at is under the File tab. And let's go down to Project Settings in the drop-down menu. And let's take a look at some of these settings here. Let's first of all take a look at the master settings, and let's look at the timeline format. And by default, DaVinci starts you out with an HD project, 1920 by 1080, for your timeline resolution. And even though most of my footage these days are 4K, this is what I usually edit at, the timeline resolution of HD, 1920 by 1080. Most of my deliveries are in HD still. If I know that I want that higher quality so that people can see it on their smart TVs in a nice 4K resolution, then I will change this to a 4K resolution and edit in that. But most people these days, even if they're watching your YouTube content, they're watching on their phone. And you don't need 4K resolution for people who are watching your videos on your phone. So I usually just edit and deliver in HD. And the advantage to that is I can take my 4K footage and crop in on it without losing any quality. This is what I usually have it set at, but it's nice to know that DaVinci does give you all of these options. You can even set it to work in 8K. All right, with the latest version of DaVinci, you can easily change this to a vertical resolution for those YouTube shorts that you want to make. And notice that when you check that the timeline resolution changes from 1920 by 1080 to 1080 by 1920. And now you'll be working with a vertical project. All right, let's now take a look down at timeline frame rate. What should we have this set at? You're given a lot of options here. 16, 18, 23.976, 24 frames a second, 25 frames a second, 29.97. Why so many different options here for a timeline frame rate? And which one should you choose? They've even got one here for 120 frames per second. What is frames per second? Well, the first thing is, if you are confused about frame rates and what they are and why they're important and what frame rate you should choose when you're filming and when you're editing, I have a video tutorial on that. I'll put the link in the description below so that once you're finished this video and you want to know more about frame rates, go ahead and take a look at that video. But for today, in this lesson, let's just say that the frame rate that you should choose here, I would recommend choosing a frame rate that matches most of the footage that you'll be bringing into the project. So, for example, if you're living in North America and you've been filming with a camera without paying too much attention to the settings, there's a good chance that by default your camera was set to 29.97. If you have deliberately changed the menu options of your camera to be filming more like a film rate, like film students want, and you've set it to 23.976, and most of the shots that you're going to be bringing into your project are at that film rate, then that's what you should select. I always go with the majority of the footage that you're bringing into your project. Whatever frame rate that is, that's what you want to set here. Just one note here, and I'll explain more about this in the video that I talked about that will be linked in the description below. Just because your camera menu settings might have an option for 24 does not necessarily mean that you ended up filming in 24 frames a second. And so people get tricked here. They say, oh, I had my camera menu set to 24 frames a second. So most of the majority of my footage must be at 24. This is what I'll select when I start my project. And so they start their project set at 24 frames a second. But then, as they start working with their footage, it just doesn't look right. And it kind of has a ghosting effect. And it flutters and stutters, and I can't figure out why. Well, if you analyze the footage carefully, you'll see that the camera manufacturer, even though it said 24 frames a second, and you chose that, it was actually filming at the 23.976. And so you're trying to edit footage at 24 frames a second that was actually shot at 23.976. And that's what's causing your problem. How do you know what your camera footage really took, whether it was 24 frames a second or 23.976? Well, once you've brought some footage in, and we'll show this to you in our next lesson, once you've brought some clips into your project, you can easily take a look and analyze, and DaVinci will show you what the true frame rate really is. And if you find that you've made a mistake here and all of your footage is actually 23.97 and you've set the project frame rate to 24, well, you can just simply close the project and start a new one and select the correct frame rate and start your project over again. We'll talk more about this in our next lesson when we actually bring some media into a project. But for now, just know that once you start your project, you can take a quick look at the real frame rate and make sure that you have set your project correctly. Because most of the footage that I bring into my projects is at this 23.976, that's the frame rate that I'm going to choose for this project. Now we can go on to video monitoring. If you are just editing on your computer alone and you're using your computer monitor to monitor your edit, then you don't really need to worry about these settings. This is just in case you do have a high-end studio monitor attached to your system and you're using that to do your color grading and that type of thing, then you'll want to come back here and make sure that all of these settings match your monitor. But these monitors cost around $8,000 to $10,000, so there's a good chance that you don't have this and you don't need to worry about it. I don't have one of those monitors, so I don't worry about those settings. Let's take a look at optimized media and render cache. What is this talking about? If you are finding that your computer, based on its age and processor speeds, what have you, is not playing your media back in real time, you might want to come take a look at this and see what you can do to change the media that you've brought in to a format that will play easier on your computer. Let's say, for example, there is media that you're bringing into your project that was shot using codecs that have a very high compression rate, and your computer is not able to uncompress those files quick enough to play in real time. Well, here you can let DaVinci know what media format would be the best to transcode those files to, so that they will play better in real time on your computer. And if you're on a Mac, you could probably go with the ProRes 422 HQ for your proxy format. If you're working on a PC, you might rather want to choose one of these DNxHR formats. And that way your proxy files will look great, but they'll play smoother on your computer. Okay, and this is just for your edit. In the end, when you go to export DaVinci, you can have DaVinci export from the actual raw media itself. And because I'm on a Mac, I have this set to ProRes, and we'll keep it there. Okay, let's take a look now at working folders, and I recommend setting your proxy generation location, your cache files location, your gallery stills location to a hard drive that is permanently attached to your computer that is a fast hard drive, an SSD hard drive, preferably using the Thunderbolt connection that is able to have very high speed transfer rates. Some of the newer ones can transfer right up to 2,000 megabytes per second. That's kind of the hard drive that you're looking for. If you are having to use these proxy files, your system drive is going to fill up very fast. And so it's better to have the file locations for this set to an SSD drive. Here I have a folder called DaVinci Cache, and just open that up, hit open, and now our proxies are going to the external SSD drive. And we'll do the same for all three. And once you've finished your project, if you have been using these proxy files to edit with, you might want to go in there to that location and clear out some of those proxies so that's not filling up your SSD drive. Now, here's an important step. Once you have changed the settings to be the timeline frame rate that you want, and you've got your proxy files going to your SSD drives, you want to be sure and not only save the settings here for this project, but also it's a good idea if you think that most of your projects are going to use these same settings to go up to the top right-hand corner of this dialog box and click on the three dots there and choose the option that says Set Current Settings as your default preset, right? And it'll ask you, do you want to update the preset? Yes, I want to update the preset. So now, every time you start a brand new project, you're going to be starting with these same presets, and your proxy files are going to be going to the right hard drive. And if a new project does require a different frame rate, well, then you will have to come in and change that. But now your default presets are going to be just the way that you've started this project. Let's go ahead and save this. Just remember, you can make all of these changes, and then if you just leave and go off to one of these other project settings, you've lost all of the changes that you've made. So be sure to save it. And then let's go back to the project settings and take a look at color management. And I recommend going into color science, and by default it is set to DaVinci YRGB. But I would recommend, especially if you're bringing in footage that was shot using the log formats of some of the newer cameras, to change this to DaVinci YRGB color managed. And once you have that set to color managed by DaVinci, it will automatically look at the different clips that you have coming into your project, and if they're shot on a log format, DaVinci will do its best to take a look at those clips and automatically apply a LUT to them so that you have a good starting point when you go to do your color grading of some of these log files. And so it really helps a lot to have this changed to color managed, and then make sure that your automatic color management is checked. SDR is probably fine for most of your projects, unless you know right from the beginning that you are going to be working on an HDR project. And once again, if this is the default setting that you would like to use for most of your projects, then it's a good idea to go up to the top right-hand corner and select Set Current Settings as your default preset. And confirm that you want to update your defaults, and then hit save. And now every time you open a brand new project, it's going to use that color managed system, and you'll be good to go. Now, the other thing that you need to remember to do is actually save this untitled project, because if you change all of these settings and then you don't save the project, then you haven't saved any settings for DaVinci to remember. So let's go ahead and actually do a Command S and give this project a name. And I'm going to call it, there's a project that I've been working on that I think I'll use as an example project for this series of lessons. And it's called Better to Die walking. And so that's what we'll call this project. And now that we have saved this with an actual name, it's no longer an untitled project, it will remember the settings that we chose over in project settings. All right, like I say, DaVinci Resolve does a very good job about having great default settings. And so for the most part, the rest of the settings are going to be fine for most purposes. Now, in some other videos, I'm going to do some quick tip videos. If there is a particular setting that might be causing some issues, or if you're running into some issues on a very particular thing, it might be because you have a wrong default setting. We'll handle those in a separate series. But for today, I think that does it. We'll see you next time here at Learning Media Skills when we take a look at starting a project. So long for today.